Yeah. So I would like to welcome everyone who is logged in to our session of the evening or recording of the session of the day. Uh, no hood, no hijab. The Karnataka hijab ban controversy. This controversy that is ongoing in the state of Karnataka, and now it has spread to nearly all the northern states of India. It has to do something with the argument between necessity of a hijab for a woman, a girl, who has who refuses to accept the established customs of uniforms in schools. They would rather break the rules than not wear a hijab. But again, this hijab in itself is something of a mystery to most of us. Is it a headscarf? Is it a piece of clothing? Or is it a religious symbol? Or is it a challenge thrown at the door of our nationalism and at our dharma? What is it? So we have our guest today, Kalavai Venkatji. He would be expounding on this topic: no hood, no hijab. What it means to have a hijab, what it is, and should we be threatened about what is going on with regards to the hijab? And before we proceed further, I would like to welcome Mr. Kalavai Venkat to start his presentation of the day. Mr. Venkat, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Vineet. Namaste, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on wherever you are. And welcome to this today's topic, no hood, no hijab. And I also want to take, you know, uh, particularly I want to invite a few Muslim apologists and Dawa folks who might have joined because some of them wanted to challenge me and I have given them both options. Either you could register here and join, or you could just follow me on FB Live. Okay, this is also being live streamed on Twitter, YouTube, and FB. So feel free to join any one of those. However, I would request that you start posting your comments and questions either here or on Facebook Live so that we can start addressing them. If you post on multiple channels, very hard to address every one of those. So uh, a few housekeeping rules. I will start with the presentation. Probably I'll speak for 30 to 40 minutes, and then it's going to be provocative. So you may have a lot of questions. Feel free to note it down. And then towards the end, we'll open up for Q&A. At that time, you can start typing your questions. Don't start typing while the meeting is in progress, because if a lot of questions are posted, then you may just end up missing all of those. So start posting towards the end. And we will prioritize those questions that are related to today's topic. So you're free to ask questions that are generic in nature but pertaining to Islam, but they will get a lower order of precedence. So we'll start with those questions which are directly relevant to today's topic. So with that, I'm going to get started. So today's topic is no hood, no hijab, the Karnataka hijab ban controversy. And as a preamble to this, I want to set a few things uh, pretty much establish those. Okay, number one, as Vineet pointed out, there is an ongoing controversy in the state of Karnataka in India. A few colleges and pre-university colleges enforced a uniform code, which also included no head, no headscarves, no hijab. And then this resulted in a lot of Muslims starting to protest, and then some of that resulted in a showdown-like situation. And now this has become a big controversy with everyone starting from Indian leftists all the way down to the American government, everyone poking their nose into that. So I wanted to educate everyone what really is this hijab all about, and why does it evoke this kind of a response from non-Muslims? That's going to be number one. Then, second thing I want to highlight in this preamble is I am not a big fan of activism or agitation politics. For the simple reason, I believe that a student should only focus on his education or her education. You get to go to college for 4 or 5 years, whereas you get to live the rest of your life, 6, 7, 8 decades, depending on how long you live. So I think it's almost unacceptable that a student is turned into a pawn for political activism or religious activism in college campuses or school campuses. It does not matter which religion it is, whether it is Hinduism, whether it is Buddhism, whether it's Christianity, Islam, or political propaganda, left or right. All of those are, in my opinion, completely unacceptable because those are all exploitations of students who, in their formative years, instead of focusing on their education and learning, end up becoming pawns in the hands of religious bigots or politicians. So I'm completely opposed to that. And third point I just want to highlight is this is not a legal presentation. I'm not a lawyer. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch upon the religious aspects of what motivates the hijab, what its impacts are, and I'll bring out some of the most cutting edge studies as we talk. That's going to be the format of today's presentation. And why this topic and what is this picture all about? So on the right hand side, what you see is something familiar to every one of you. That's the veiled Muslim woman. So she's wearing a hijab. On the left, you find somebody wearing a white color hood and a white color garb. And then there is also a blood drop cross, Christian cross, painted but slightly hidden by the arm, which is the folded arm. That is the gear the Ku Klux Klan members used to wear in the United States and sometimes still wear it in the United States. However, in most of the US, this is banned, so they cannot publicly wear it. In some states, it's allowed and they can continue to wear it. And Ku Klux Klan is a Christian organization. It's also a white racist organization. And the Klansmen would go about persecuting Black people and anybody else or interracial couple, and all of those people commit violence against them. And that's the symbol, that's what their attire symbolizes that. And what is the relevance between the two? What's the connection between the two? We'll talk about it. So what really is hijab? One of the best explanations for that has been given by Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. He was one of the most respected, at the same time very conservative Muslim clergy, Muslim clerics who passed away last year. I think he also won the Padma Shri Award from the government of India. And he translated a book written by a cleric, a Jordanian Albanian cleric by the name Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani. That's why the name Albani is there. He's Albanian by birth, and then he lived and died in Jordan. And then he wrote a book. The name of that's given there, it's Muslima fil Kitab. And then that was translated by Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. The English translation is called Hijab in Islam. That's a book every one of you should read because that gives you the most accurate description of what hijab is. So here are the 8 points about that. I'm not going to read every one of those, but I'm going to highlight 3 of those. First one, it's a whole body covering, except for the exempted parts. The exempted parts are typically the outer clothing or parts of the body that really cannot be concealed. For example, your eyes. So except that, it requires everything to be covered. And then second thing it highlights is the form of dress should not resemble that of men. And the third one is the hijab should not resemble the attire worn by non-believers. So these are the most 3 important points. However, the important distinction that Wahiduddin Khan makes is hijab is not just the headscarf. Hijab is the veil. Hijab is the screen that segregates the Muslim woman from other men who are not her family members. Even if they are Muslims, she has to be segregated from them. And certainly she has to be segregated from non-Muslims. So it's also first and foremost a tool of segregation. And there are many, many types of hijab. One of those is an abaya, there's a niqab, then there is the burqa. All of these are different types of hijab. And contrary to what most people think, hijab is not just the headscarf. Of course, covering the hair, covering the skin of the face, and all of these things are mandated in Islam. But hijab in itself is the screen, it's the veil that segregates the Muslim woman from non-Muslims. And what gave rise to the hijab? Hijab was not part of the Arab culture until Islam was born. And where did Islam get this from? It got it from 2 different sources. One is the Persians, Among the Persians, the noble women, especially the women of the court, wore the veil. Okay, it was considered a very prestigious thing among them, and they wore it, and that was copied by the Muslims. Similarly, in the Byzantine Empire, a very similar thing happened where the noble women would be wearing a veil, and then the early Muslims started copying it. However, there is a more important reason why hijab got into Islam. That's the insecurity of Muhammad. So there are multiple Quranic verses and hadiths from which we get a very good idea of Muhammad's attitude towards women. And one of them is narrated by Sahih Muslim, in which one of the followers of Muhammad comes to him and tells, if I ever found my wife with another man, and we need not presume it's about, the two of them having an affair or having sex or anything, but even the two of them sitting down and talking to each other, if I ever catch them, I'll kill my wife. And then Muhammad asks him, are you jealous? And then he says, yes. And then Muhammad says, I am even more jealous than you are. And Allah is even more jealous than me. Which means Muhammad will also do the same thing. He will kill his wife if she were to be interacting with other men who are not family members. And he also says Allah is even more jealous than me. And according to Quran, according to Islam, Allah doesn't have a wife. I do not know what he is jealous of, but then he's still jealous. Then the second narrative comes from Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas was a cousin of Muhammad and then one of the very early chroniclers of Islam. And then he talks about an episode in which a man who's a follower of Muhammad, he's a Muslim too. He once meets one of the wives of Muhammad and has a conversation with her. And then Muhammad comes to know of it and he interrogates that person. He demands to know why he spoke to his wife, And then that man says, oh, she's just my cousin. That's why I spoke to her. I had no bad intention. And the Muhammad says, I know that you did not have any bad intention. However, there is none more jealous than me and Allah, and don't talk to my wife ever again. And then that man walks away, cursing Muhammad and saying that the day Muhammad dies, I'll go back and marry my cousin. Of course, it did not happen because before Muhammad died, he said his widows cannot remarry. And they were declared the mothers of Muslims. And the youngest of them was Aisha. Aisha would have been barely 16 when Muhammad died. And they were all declared mothers of Muslims, and they couldn't. So other Muslims could not marry these women. And that's how hijab became firmly rooted in Islam. First and foremost, it is the product of the insecurity of Muhammad and early Muslims who compiled the texts and traditions. One of the most common arguments you hear from both Muslim apologists as well as leftists is that the hijab is a choice of an attire. And some of them will even aggressively demand to know, who are you to tell the Muslim woman what to wear? On the surface, it sounds like a very reasonable question. Who are we to tell somebody whether they should wear the hijab, whether they should not, whether someone should wear a mini skirt, whether someone should wear a pair of trousers? Sounds very reasonable, unless we get into a little bit more of details. First thing is to start questioning, why at all are they wearing? The most common answer given by the Muslims is, oh, we are wearing it so that we want to avert the roving eyes of men. If that's the case, I've always wondered, Allah is all powerful. Okay, if a woman showing a little bit of hair on her head will cause temptations in the minds of Muslim men, then Allah could have either created Muslim women bald or Muslim men blind. That would have solved all of this problem. Or Allah, being all powerful, could have done something even better. He could have said that, he could have created all the human beings, particularly Muslims, so that they feel attraction only towards their spouses and not towards anybody else. That way, it wouldn't matter whether they wore the hijab or not. But Allah did not do any of those things. And instead, he forced the Muslim women to wear the hijab, apparently because that would tempt Muslim men. And I found this, an analogy I would always love to give is, that's like a builder building a home without a roof and asking you to hold an umbrella 24/7 to protect yourselves from the elements. And that doesn't sound like a very smart God to me. And what happens? Is this really a choice? a choice always has a corollary, right? We have to look at the consequences. For example, if you go to other parts of India, particularly Rajasthan and even in Uttar Pradesh, if you go and visit some of the sects like the Ram Nami, then those women do cover their head. Not all the time. Sometimes they will do, sometimes they will not. But there is no consequence for not covering their head. That's not the case with uh, Muslims. A Muslim woman who does not cover her head is often the target of attack. So, for example, recently a Jordanian court uh, declared and it ruled that those women who do not cover their heads, those who do not wear the hijab, are sluts. And just a few months ago, after the Taliban took over Afghanistan, you would have read the news of the Taliban going after a 20-year-old woman and killing her. She was publicly executed. Her crime? She wore a pair of jeans and not the hijab. And she was executed. So that's a very fundamental difference. For a Muslim woman, hijab is not a choice. There is a price she will have to pay if she does not wear the hijab. And talking about choice, I am always going to wonder, can a child who is brainwashed from childhood, can she always discern and make a choice? I want to talk about a study which was conducted in 2015 to explain this point. So, a team of Muslim academics, they studied 960 madrasas in Karnataka. And these madrasas are not really small. The largest of them has something like 1200 or 1300 students, and the smallest has something like 120 or 130 students. And they studied the madrasas not with the intent of criticizing those madrasas or shutting those madrasas down. Their intent was they believe that the madrasas are beneficial, and then they want Muslims to go and attend the madrasas and get educated there. At the same time, they recognize the fact, and they talk about it. They recognize the fact that madrasas create a negative perception in the minds of members of society. The rest of society perceives madrasa in very negative terms. So how can we fix that? So as part of that, they recognize that there could be some problems in madrasas which should be corrected. And they talk about those. And then they say Muslim parents often threaten their children. We are talking about children who are barely 3, 4, or 5. They threaten those children and tell them, if you don't behave, we'll send you to madrasa. So madrasa induces fright in the minds of children from a very young age. And these authors also talk about how Muslim children are caned in the madrasas. They are frightened, they are threatened, they are beaten up. And it's this kind of abuse Muslim children face in the madrasas. And then these academics say that those problems should be addressed so that the madrasas are perceived in a very positive light. So, in a nutshell, they also talk about the kind of education the Muslim girl would receive in the madrasa. She receives all of the indoctrination about Islam in less than 4 years, which means if she joined the madrasa at the age of 5 or 6, by the time she turns 10, she has been completely indoctrinated in Islam, and her mind is imprinted with the Islamic worldview. And this worldview comes with a lot of consequences. Number one, there is a fear. Okay, if you are not a good Muslim, if you do not follow the Sunnah or the commandments and the practices of Islam, then you will go to hell. You are a bad Muslim. And then number two, like the Jordanian courts and then the Taliban and others have been stating, the child is also made to think that a child who is not wearing the hijab is a slut. And she is going to shame her family, and she is not going to be a good Muslim. And then for somebody who is brought up with the notion of hellfire, torment, and all of these things, especially a child, because children tend to believe these things more than adults do. And for someone like that, all of this is imprinted. And even when the child grows up, she is unable to overcome this kind of fear mongering. And then she also starts feeling guilty. If I do not wear the hijab, then I am a letdown to my family, I am a letdown to my ummah, to the rest of the Islamic community. And this is not only limited to the children who are very young. And there is a very good YouTuber. His name is Apostate Prophet. His name is Ridwan Aydemir. He's a Turkish Muslim apostate, and every one of you should be really following his channel. He's a brilliant chap, and then he makes excellent presentations. And then in one of his recent episodes, he talks about his aunt. Um, Ridwan, or apostate prophet, is a Turkish guy who I think was born and brought up in Germany. And then he had an aunt who also lived in Germany. And then she was very modern, meaning she would wear modern attire, and then she was not really a practicing Muslim. And then she would date non-Muslim German guys. And that was frowned upon by the rest of the community. And then they would be really cursing her and torment her and make her life miserable. At one stage, she was presented with the option of losing all of her family, her relatives, and everyone, or uh, continue with her westernized or modern lifestyle. So what she did was to choose her family over her preferred modern lifestyle. So she goes back to Turkey. She marries a Muslim Turkish guy and comes back, or maybe he was living in Germany. No, he was not. He was living in Turkey, and then brings him back to Germany. And long story short, he becomes very suspicious of her because her lifestyle, in her friends in the social media, she has friends who are males, and even if she is not having any amorous relationship, she's just having a conversation with them, he would feel threatened, he would feel jealous, just like Allah and Prophet Muhammad. He would also feel jealous. And just like Prophet Muhammad said, if I ever caught my wife, I would be killing her. Talking to some other man, I would be killing her. This man decided to do the same thing. He executed her publicly in Germany by shooting her dozens of times in her face, and she died. So he talks about, so what does it mean? This woman was intelligent. She grew up in Germany, and she had actually given up Islam for all practical purposes. And yet, when presented with the option of shunning by the family and leading a more modern lifestyle, at one stage she caved into pressure, she yielded, and then she went back to Islam and she lost her life. So, this is a very fundamental problem. So, a woman or a child who is brought up uh, completely conditioned by an Islamic worldview, where she is told from childhood that if you do not live this kind of a life, then you are a slut, you are a bad Muslim, and you are let down to the family, and we will all shun you, and finally Allah will take care of you and torment you in hell for eternity. Many of them will not be discerning enough, and they will not critically look at Islam, and they will, out of guilt or out of fear, end up wearing the hijab. So the very fundamental argument that hijab is a choice of attire is an absurd argument, and it's actually a very cruel argument in my opinion. But sometimes um, these people, who are fanatics and who end up wearing the hijab in the Western world, or a good example is the Indian musician A.R. Rahman's daughter. So A.R. Rahman is one of the richest Indians, and his daughter um, lived a very privileged life from her childhood. And then she will sometimes, when she's traveling abroad, she would be wearing modern attire, jeans, skirts, whatever. But when she's showing up in public events, she would be wearing the hijab. And a lot of times people will argue that, and such people would argue, this is a choice. And I know I'm living in the modern world and I have made this choice out of my own volition. What's your problem? And that's where I think we should look at the example of the FLDS church. On the right hand side, you see the image of a book called Under the Banner of Heaven. It was written by John Krakauer, and then he wrote this about the FLDS church. FLDS church is a splinter of the Mormon church in the United States. And like the Mormons, FLDS also practices polygamy, with one difference. Faced with US government action, the Mormons gave up polygamy, but the FLDS church went underground. They would continue to practice polygamy, and there will be hideous examples of a man marrying multiple women, sometimes the mother as well as the daughter from a previous marriage. And he will marry both of them and he'll sleep with both of them. And when finally everyone started cracking, the police started cracking down on the FLDS church, a lot of those kids and a lot of those young people, they came and said, well, we got into this polygamous marriage out of our own volition. We made this choice. What's your problem? Why are you guys opposing that? Okay, it's the same argument the hijabis are also giving today. Okay, they are saying we have made this choice. However, those children who were raised in the FLDS church really did not have a choice, because from the childhood they were never exposed to a real world. in all of its contours, in all of its complexities, and they never critically examine the beliefs of their own church. And third, they would be shunned if they did not follow. And fourth, since they are brainwashed, by the time they turn 10, 11, 12, 13, they had not had any other imprint except what they received from their church, from the clergymen, and from their own family. They were never influenced by the rest of society, by modernity, by science, nothing. And hence, when they say they made a choice, they are simply parroting what they have been taught. They have not really made a choice. To make a choice, you should A, be exposed to multiple options and you should be able to choose from one. For example, if a woman says, look, uh, when I go to my yoga class, I'm wearing my yoga pants. Then I go to my swim class, I wear my swimsuit. Then sometimes I'll wear a pair of jeans. And some other times I'll end up wearing a hijab, just a headscarf, not any other type of hijab. For example, when I go and meet some elders or when I go to pray, that would be arguably, we can say, okay, that is a choice. However, when there is a consequence for not wearing the hijab and that consequence is terrible, and then these kids have got no other exposure, and then when they claim and when they come and argue that they have made a choice, that's simply an example of them parroting what they have been taught. And what does hijab really symbolize? So for example, in the uh, in the case of hijab, uh, from the very earliest times, hijab was only meant for the Muslim women, and it was not meant for non-Muslim women. And non-Muslim women were not allowed to wear the hijab at all. Okay? And especially the slave women, because Islam allows Muslim men to marry up to 4 wives, except for Muhammad. Muhammad could marry any number of wives, but the rest of the Muslim men can only marry up to 4 wives. However, they could have any number of concubines. Those are called in the Quran what the right hand possesses. So they often, those women, those concubines or sex slaves, so those are kafir women and who have been captured in war after those men have been slaughtered and brought over by the Muslims, and they can live with them. And those women were not allowed to wear the hijab, and they had to often go uh, bare chested. Okay, they have to expose their breasts inside their home, sometimes even outside, and they were only allowed to wear a skirt, but nothing above the waist. In other words, hijab is all about segregating the Muslims and allowing non-Muslim women to be exploited. And that's what makes hijab one of the most exploitative attires that was, or symbols that was ever invented, and it could never be a choice. And for example, if you look at one of the, Shebani's statement, the last bullet point you're looking at, it talks about a man cannot look at any other woman except his own sex slaves. And those women, he can stare at their breasts, so they have to keep it exposed. Okay. And then he can look at their face, he can stare at their face, that means they cannot cover their face. But for reasons I do not know or nobody knows, is that uh, uh, Shaban says that they cannot stare at the region between their waist and their thigh. Okay. So except that the woman, that's the only portion a slave woman was allowed to cover. A slave woman is a non-Muslim, and everybody else had to wear the hijab. The Muslim women had to wear the hijab. So this is first and foremost a symbol of oppression, a symbol of segregation, and not one of choice. So now, why is this the equivalent of the KKK hood? So KKK hood, the Ku Klux Klan, the hood that we saw at the beginning of the speech, it's about hatred. It's about segregation. It segregates the whites and the blacks, and then it's about hatred because it dehumanizes non-white, non-Christian people. Okay, and then that's why a lot of times the black people would be captured by the KKK, and then they would be hanged from the trees, and all of these things happen. Exactly the same here. This is no different. In the case of the hijab is there intended to segregate the Muslim women and the non-Muslims, and then to treat non-Muslim women as nothing more than sex slaves who have to remain topless for the pleasure of Muslim men or the Muslim slave master and be exploited, whereas the Muslim woman has to veil herself and has to segregate herself and has to put a screen between her and then the rest of society. And that's what makes it an equivalent of the KKK attire. However, of the two, I would argue that the hijab is more pernicious. Why? Because today, or for the last 100 years, for that reason, society has been making fun of the Ku Klux Klan. We have been making fun of their hood, their ideology, everything. Okay? And in many states in the United States, the KKK mask or the hood is banned. It's not allowed. Okay? I think the last time uh, it was made legal was around 1960. It remained that way for about 30 years or so in the state of Georgia, but in 1992, it was completely banned. Okay, so in many states of the US, you cannot wear the hood and you cannot travel because we could criticize KKK, and no leftist will jump to the defense of the KKK and say this hood is a choice. Okay, and nobody will say, suppose tomorrow a woman goes to office, goes to work in the United States or in any of the Western countries wearing the hood of the Ku Klux Klan, nobody will say, oh, she's just, exercising her choice, and who are you to tell the woman what she should wear? We will immediately ask the question, what does this hood symbolize? Okay, we would say this symbolizes the KKK ideology. It's an ideology of hatred. It's an ideology that dehumanizes non-Muslim, non-Christian, non-white people, and then it's a criminal and violent ideology it stands for. That's why we do not tolerate it. But at least we can criticize and we can suppress it by legal means. Whereas in the case of the Islamic hijab, you cannot even criticize it because the leftists will jump to the defense of the hijabis, and then they will start vilifying those who are criticizing it. And then on top of that, they will also glorify it as a choice. And then there are also hijab days. Some of you might have seen that, where some of the very privileged Western women, who don't pay the price for all of these things, they end up wearing the hijab and they end up showing up at work. Please don't ask questions now. Q&A is at the end. Okay? So they show up they will show up at work and they'll put a show. Okay, it's a virtue signaling exercise they will indulge in. And this is extremely cruel for the simple reason, for millions of Muslim women around the planet, it's not a choice. They will pay with their lives. They'll face terrible violence. They'll face shunning. Okay, they'll face exploitation of every sort if they do not wear the hijab. And if they wear the hijab, they will end up surrendering their lives to the mullahs and the khazis and other criminals. Because this child will be then sent to the madrasa, where she will be attending only a girls-only school, and then not study anything that is relevant to modern life. She won't learn enough of science. She won't learn enough of mathematics, none of those things. And then she'll be taught Quran, she'll be taught the hadiths, and then she'll be taught how to be a good Muslim woman, meaning how to be a sex chattel. So either way, it's cruel to millions of Muslim women because they don't get to exercise any freedom. That's what makes this kind of pretension from leftists in the Western world, who end up defending the hijab because they are defending something which causes immense and infinite harm to millions of Muslim women around the planet. This is worse than cowardice. This is cruelty. This is crime. The second argument you always hear from Muslim apologists as well as from leftist propagandists is that, well, we agree that there are some problems with hijab. This is about those who are not arguing that hijab is a choice, right? These guys will argue, or these women will argue that, well, we agree that hijab is problematic, but let the Muslim women decide. Okay, let the Muslims reform their religion from within. Okay, why are you poking the nose? Okay, why are you, Hindus or atheists poking your nose? Okay, so is this a legitimate argument? Let's start with it. First of all, why should that be the case? Why should a reform only come from within Islam? After all, it has not come in the last 1300 or 1400 years. Okay, Islam had an opportunity to reform itself. And we'll see in the next few minutes that it actually got worse. It regressed more in the last couple of centuries than ever before. So in the first place, Muslims have not shown any ability over the last 1400 years to reform their own religion. So it's, I think, first of all, wrong to argue, or it's an argument without any basis, that Muslims alone can reform their religion. And even more importantly, we should look at some of the arguments presented by Professor Shadi Nasser. Okay, Shadi Nasser is a professor of Islamic studies at Harvard University, and he is also one of the leading experts in the world on the transmission of the early Quranic texts and traditions, and all the variants and everything that go with it. Okay, contrary to what most Muslim thinks, the Quran is not is not something that was never corrupted, and instead it has had a lot of variants. And that's why even an ultra conservative like Yasir Qadhi threw a bombshell last year when he said the standard narrative has holes in it. The standard narrative is that the Quran was revealed by Allah and it has been preserved perfectly without a single corruption. And he admitted that has complete holes in it. So Shadi Nasser talks about a lot of things, but one of the very important ones he talks about is the example of Al-Mari. Okay, Al-Mari was an Arab poet and a writer, and according to Shadi Nasser, he's the equivalent of Shakespeare. Okay, he's the Shakespeare of the Arab world. He lived in the 10th century. He wrote a book called Al-Fusul wal Ghal. Okay, and that's a book translated as Paragraphs and Periods. So the Quran, what is this book all about? The Quran, Surah 17, verse 88, throws a challenge. It says, nobody can create a book like the Quran. If all the angels and if all the human beings come together, they cannot still create a book like this. So in our case, Al-Mari takes up the challenge. And then he writes this book, Paragraphs and Periods. So that is written somewhat like the Quran. Okay, it's actually an imitation of that. Okay, or the style of that. Okay, and then he publishes that book. And then the rest of the Muslims come and ask him, okay, Al-Mari, what happened? You published that book. Okay, what happened to your Quran? They mock him. Okay, and he gives a brilliant answer. He says, you have to polish it in the mosque for the next 400 years. Okay, because meaning that the Quran is no better than my book, but then you have been polishing it in the mosque and then you have been putting it on the pedestal. That's why you start thinking that the Quran is inimitable. And you do the same thing to my book, then it will become inimitable too in the next 400 years, just polish it in the mosque. But this tells you something very interesting. In the 10th century, someone could write a book like this, okay, and take up the challenge that Allah has thrown at human beings and then respond to that. You cannot do that today. So recently, a North African girl tried the same thing. She composed a surah and then she is in jail right now. And even others, if you go to YouTube, you'll find, just search for Surah Faqaf, okay, F-A, and then, Q-A-F-F, whatever, right? Surah Faqaf, okay, Q-A-A-F, okay. And that person is an Arab speaker, but he had to do that or she had to do that anonymously because otherwise he or she would be executed. So contrasted with what was the scenario in the 10th century when Al-Mari wrote Paragraphs and Periods, today, such a criticism of Islam or even some of its most absurd assertions, like the one you find in Quran 1788, is almost impossible today. Then look at the second one. Again, this one is by Shaybani. This was written in the 9th century, at the very beginning of the 9th century. He says something which will be very shocking to most of people today. He says that it is not permissible for a woman to wear the niqab during the Hajj. But he is willing to make a little bit of concession. He says, however, if you want, just cover the face, but then don't cover the rest of the body. Okay. So in other words, that's only a practical concession he is willing to make. And then the desirable thing to do when you go on the Hajj is not to wear the hijab at all. Today, it's the exact opposite of that. And what does it again tell you? In the last 1200 years, ever since Shaybani wrote, Islam has regressed. It has become far more intolerant, far more conservative and everything. Then Maturidi writes again in the 10th century, towards the end of the 10th century, and he says something which will be shocking to most of the Muslims today. He says it's absolutely permissible for someone, stranger, to look at the Muslim woman, her face or her hair or any of these things, so long as you do not have any amorous desire in your heart. Okay. And even then, he says, even if you had that amorous desire, it is not a sin. However, uh, what what you should fear are the consequences of having such amorous desires. That's what you should fear about, because that will create discord in the family relationships and other things. Okay, that's a much more enlightened view that prevailed at least in sections of Islamic community, something like 1,100 years ago. But today we can note that Islam has completely regressed. Today, such a thought is absolutely impossible. And if we point this out to Muslims today, most of them won't even believe that such things really happen. Then look at the picture on the right. What do you think it is? You know, in the this is a picture from the 18th century. This was painted in Lucknow. Okay, this was painted right after the time of Aurangzeb. Okay, that means it was painted in a very conservative Islamic society, probably by a Muslim artist. Okay, we do not know who painted it. Okay, so this is about the nocturnal sojourn Muhammad had. Okay, from the Dome of the Rock, where he goes to heaven. He rides to heaven, or he flies to heaven on the back of a horse called the Burak. Okay, and that's the horse painted there. And what you find is Muhammad sitting on the horse and flying out. And even more interestingly, what you find is it's having the face of a woman, and she's wearing a bindi. Okay, so pretty much they could even envisage the horse which carried Muhammad to heaven as a Hindu woman. Okay, and of course, when I saw this painting first, I was really puzzled. I started wondering, why are Jeff Bezos and who's the other guy, the Virgin Galactic guy, why did they have to spend literally tens of millions of dollars just to get to the outer space when Muhammad had already perfected the technique of traveling on this horse to heaven and come back? Okay, they could have just copied the technique and they could have traveled and returned. But then, what can we do with kafirs? Even if you give them all the knowledge, they're going to just shun it. So now this was painted just in the 18th century. Today, such a painting is impossible, because in France or in Denmark, when they painted Muhammad, there were riots. People were killed. Those cartoonists who painted Muhammad were executed. So once again, what we are seeing is a complete regression within the Islamic community. Okay, so even a few thousand years, even 1,000 years ago or a few centuries ago, some things were possible are no longer possible today. Okay? And this does not mean that Islam was ever a liberal or a preferable or a desirable religion at any point in time. Right from the beginning, Islam was always a very conservative religion, but it just got worse and worse over a period of time. With the rise of Salafism, with the rise of Wahhabism in the last couple of centuries, it simply got worse. Then Ambedkar, who was the father of India's constitution, made some very good observations about the Islamic veil. And this was recently, all of his observations on that were summarized in the Swarajya Mag a couple of weeks ago, or I think last week. And you should refer to that. And he makes a lot of very good observations, but some of them which are very pertinent. Anubhavan, he calls it the most hideous thing. The wearing of the hijab is the most hideous, and he gives the reason for them. It oppresses the Muslim woman, and she acquires no skill whatsoever that are necessary to survive in this world. And third, it also isolates her from the rest of the community, rest of society, that's the Hindus and others. And he makes another very important argument. He says, Muslim women are not wearing hijab because Hindus are shunning. It's the other way around. Okay. Hindus are asking, and he says that's a very legitimate ask. They are asking, look, our women are not wearing the hijab. Our women can go out and study. They can go out and work. They can interact with the rest of society. And when Muslim women cannot do that, what kind of interaction will we have? That interaction will be only between women of one community and the men of the other. And it's not going to be an interaction between Hindu men and Muslim women. So in other words, the radicalism within Muslims actually forces Hindus to become more conservative. That was the gist of the argument that Ambedkar was making. Now, Ambedkar made this argument about 80 years ago, 77, 78 years ago. And in those 70, 80 years, Muslims have not made any progress. Okay, they have not reformed themselves. They did not make any progress in the last 200 years. since the painting on the right was made. And they did not make any progress in the last 1,000 years since Al-Mahri wrote. They did not make any progress in the last 1,200 years since Shaybani wrote. So in 1,200 years, you have not reformed your own religion. And is it reasonable for you to argue that only you would reform it and nobody should talk about it? At the end of the day, the Muslim women are not the property of the mullahs. They are not the property of Muslim men. They are individuals in their own right. At the end of the day, we are going to care about our own women folk. Okay, we wouldn't want them to suffer. We would want them to get educated. We would want them to become productive members of society. We would want them to explore knowledge. We should wish the same for Muslim women too. And that means the reforming of Islam is not just the responsibility of Muslims, it's the responsibility of everyone. And take the case of the triple talaq. So in Islam, someone can just utter the word talaq thrice and divorce his wife. And many times they could also simply text it, send it by WhatsApp, and then the woman stands divorced. So there are times when the Muslim women in the past used to fight against that. And that happened for the first time in the 1980s in the very infamous Shah Banu episode. She was divorced. She was a Muslim woman and she was divorced and thrown on the streets. And she ran to the courts asking for justice. And the courts ruled in her favor. They said her husband has to pay alimony. And Islamic law doesn't allow paying of the alimony. So the Congress government and the left joined hands, and then they abrogated, they annulled the judgment of the Supreme Court of India, and then they said the Muslims will continue to be governed by Sharia law insofar as the triple talaq is concerned, and that continued for the next nearly 25 years until the BJP came to power, and then said, look, we want to hear the voice of the Muslim women. Okay, Muslim women are suffering because of triple talaq, and many Muslim women have silently protested against that. They have expressed that desire for talaq to be annulled, triple talaq laws to be annulled. So we want justice. And finally, triple talaq was made illegal in India after Prime Minister Narendra Modi took over. So in other words, on those occasions, when Muslim women themselves wanted justice and they wanted to break free from the clutches of Islam, it's the left, it's the liberals who have actually sided with the mullahs, who have sided with the most obscurantist elements and have thrown Muslim women under the bus. And then they come back and argue the reform should come only from within Islam. It came. That's what the Shah Banu episode was all about. That's what the triple talaq was all about. And then you threw the Muslim women under the bus, and you are coming and arguing that the reform should only come from within Islam. There's nothing more unscrupulous and cruel than this. There's a really good writer, and her name is Ashia Malik, and she wrote a brilliant article on the ongoing controversy around hijab. Everyone should read that. It's available online. And the most important point she makes is this. She contrasts what happened in Kashmir before and after 1990. So before 1990, the sight of hijab was not very common. A few women wore it. Okay, typically it would have been the case in small villages or something, but most of them were quite free. Okay, it was quite a free place because I have traveled in Kashmir at that time and I don't recall seeing too many hijabs. But after that, Kashmir increasingly came under the domination of the mullahs and the most regressive elements within Islam. And today, the hijab is a very common sight all over Kashmir. And this is the case everywhere in India. So in my state, I come from the state of Tamil Nadu in India. And in Tamil Nadu, when I grew up, hijab was not at all a common sight. The only ones who would wear any form of hijab, whether it's the burqa or just the hijab or abaya or any one of these things, would be only a very small number of women who were typically the Patani Muslims. Okay, the Patani Muslims were, the descendants, or they thought they were descendants of Pathans. And then some of them would wear it, not all. And the rest of, and they would all be speaking Urdu as their mother tongue. And the rest of the Muslims who were Tamil speaking Muslims, I never saw them wear it. They would just be wearing sari like the rest of the Hindu women. And except the only difference is when they came into contact with others, they'll just take the pallu and put it over their head and then take it off once they leave that place. So what we are seeing everywhere, and Ashia Malik also points out the example of Egypt. Okay, when a few decades ago in Egypt, and they announced, that the Muslim Brotherhood wanted the women to be veiled, to wear the hijab, it produced derisive laughter. Okay, that could be seen on the video, and there was derisive laughter because um, Muslim women had tasted a little bit of freedom, and then they thought it will be laughable for them to be wearing the hijab. Okay, and we saw that in 1979 in Iran too. During the Iran revolution, when they threw the Shahs out and brought in Khomeini, that's what the women did. Women, you could see in the pictures, even were wearing jeans, skirts, and everything. They were not wearing the hijab, any form of hijab, not the headscarf, not the abaya, nothing. And then they were protesting. But on their way back, after Khomeini took over, they were beaten up, they're forced to wear the hijab. So everywhere what you're seeing is a regress within the Muslim community. Okay, it's not my argument that the Muslim community was ever liberal, okay, or it was ever enlightened. There were flashes of enlightenment. A good example is Al-Hajjaj. Okay, Al-Hajjaj travels to India. Okay, he learns Vedanta, then he goes back, and then he talks about the unity of the Atman. Okay, something very similar to Brahman. He talks about that. He gets executed. Okay, those kind of flash in the pans happen, but then they could never take root in Islam. For the most part, Islam has always been a very conservative religion, but it got worse after the rise of Wahhabi and Salafism, and in particular with the domination and especially with the unholy alliance between the left and the most conservative of the Muslim elements. What has happened is Islam has regressed more and more and more into conservatism at the expense of Muslim women. The next question that comes up is the hijab necessary to practice Islam? The answer is yes. Okay, because a lot of times I think Hindus as well as atheists attempt clever by the half argument, and they'll say, oh, by the way, Islam does not mandate that, and you should be not wearing the hijab. Okay, in other words, you're putting the Quran, the Hadiths, and the Sunnah on the pedestal, and then you are saying, let us use that as the yardstick. And then I know your Quran and your Sunnah more than you do, and let me try to interpret that. I'll tell you, your Quran is not mandating it, and so don't wear it. I think it's a stupid argument. Okay, as I pointed out earlier, the Quran mandates it. Okay, the Quran says a woman should cover herself. The Hadiths say that repeatedly. Okay, and very importantly, Muslims are governed by the Sunnah. Okay, which is derived not only from the Quran but from the Hadiths and the life examples of Prophet Muhammad. And there are a lot of things which are necessary to practice Islam. Okay, everything which is part of Sunnah is absolutely necessary to practice Islam, and one of those is the stoning of the adulteress. So, the Quran, for example, does not advocate stoning a Muslim woman. Okay, so there's a typo. Let me just fix that so that it's easy for you to read it. Okay. So the Quran does not recommend stoning of the adulteress. Okay, if a Muslim woman committed adultery, she has to be flogged, she has to be beaten up, she has to be treated like dirt, right? All of that is recommended in the Quran. However, the Quran does not recommend the stoning. Okay, at least the Quran as it exists today. However, there was an episode. Okay, there is a hadith in which Aisha, right after the death of Prophet Muhammad, comes and says, no, by the way, stoning of the adulteress is allowed, and there was a Quranic verses that was revealed, and Prophet Muhammad himself used to go and stone adulteresses. Okay, and then she said, I had that verse written down on a papyrus, and then I put it under the bed on which the Prophet and I slept. And when Prophet died, we, all the wives of Prophet, we were busy performing the ablutions, taking care of the rituals and other things for burial. At the time, a goat walked in and it ate the papyrus. And this is a very problematic verse for the Muslims. This is a very problematic hadith for the Muslims because it controverts Quran 15.9. Okay, Surah 15 verse 9, in which Allah says that He is guarding the Quran against all corruption. I have revealed the Quran and I am protecting it. I am protecting it from all kinds of corruptions. So it looks like an ordinary goat which is bakra in Arabic, an ordinary goat could just eat away what Allah is protecting. So to me, it looks like Allah is not that powerful. I do not know why Muslims are saying Allahu Akbar or Allah is great. I think they should start saying Bakrahu Akbar, because in this case, the goat, the Bakra, seems to have been a lot more powerful than Allah, because in 59 Allah says, I reveal the Quran and I am protecting it from all kinds of corruption. And then a goat simply comes and eats it away. And the verse has disappeared. It's not there in the Quran anymore. However, can you please mute yourself? Rajiv, can you please mute everyone?
Join the meeting.
Thank you. Guys, kindly mute yourself. Q&A comes at the end. And then, according to the hadiths, adultery is punishable by death. Okay, because Sahih al-Bukhari, which is a very trusted hadith, in that Prophet Muhammad says that anyone who commits adultery is an apostate. Okay, and the punishment for apostasy in Islam is death. And similarly, there is another verse in Sahih Muslim, which is also very authentic hadith, in which a Muslim woman comes and implies, she doesn't say openly to Prophet Muhammad that, look, I might have committed adultery. And then initially he says, just go away. Okay, and then she repeats that, and then he finds out that she's also pregnant. Then he says, all right, give birth to the child, and then, suckle the child, and then let me know once you have weaned the child from your breast. That happens, and then she's brought back, and then he orders all the people to stone her to death. Okay, so in other words, the stoning of the adulteress is necessary to practice Islam, but it's not allowed. Okay, we don't allow it in the United States, we don't allow it in Europe, we don't allow it in India. So effectively, what are we telling? Just because something is necessary for you to practice Islam does not mean we will allow that. If it is inhumane and if it is not part of a civilized society, we will not allow that. In other words, we are telling you, it does not matter what your Allah says, what your Quran says. Your Quran and Allah and Muhammad are secondary to the constitution of the land. It's the law of the land that even Allah, Muhammad, and the Quran has to obey. And if we have taken that approach, and that's what we have done everywhere, and we also looked at the triple talaq law, and Allah allowed Muslim men to divorce Muslim women by just pronouncing triple talaq, saying the word talaq thrice. But Narendra Modi came and declared, I am more powerful than Allah. I am going to abrogate that. You cannot do triple talaq anymore. Okay, and if you can do that, so what? If hijab is necessary to practice Islam, it's inhumane, it's cruel, it's oppressive of Muslim women, and it segregates Muslim women from non-Muslims. So this is racist, this is against feminine, and even if it is necessary to practice Islam, we will not allow that. A civilized society should not allow that. And we have enough precedent for that. And there are more than 15 or 16 countries around the world which have banned the hijab, and many of those countries are Islamic themselves. And that being the case, we don't have to yield to this argument that the hijab is necessary to practice Islam, because stoning the adulteress is also necessary to practice Islam. We are not tolerating it, and we won't tolerate in this case either. And with that, what I'm going to do is stop the share and start concluding the speech. So the first place, the hijab is not just a headscarf. The hijab is a veil. The hijab is a screen. Its intent is to isolate the Muslim woman and segregate her from non-Muslims. Then number two, hijab always had a converse side. The converse side was that the kafir women or the sex slaves of Muslims could not wear the hijab. Hijab was meant for only the Muslim women, and the non-Muslim women had to go topless, and they could be completely exploited by the Muslim men. That was recommended by the hadiths and by the sunnah. And then third one, the hijab is not a choice. Okay? And hijab is a product of conditioning in the madrasas and in the most conservative of the Islamic households, and it's an abuse of children. It's child abuse. Okay, teaching a child from childhood that if you do not wear the hijab, then you are a slut is nothing but child abuse, because the child feels guilty about leading a normal life for the rest of her life. And oftentimes, like the Jordanian judgment I was quoting, a woman who is not wearing the hijab is often equated with a slut or with an adulteress. Okay, so that's extremely demeaning to women. It's demeaning to even men. Okay, it's even demeaning to Muslim men, because even Muslim men uh, have the even they deserve not to grow up with this kind of misogynistic worldview, okay, in this kind of perverted worldview, where they will be oppressing their own women. They also deserve to uh, relate to women in a very healthy manner. And I'm not just talking about, an amorous relationship or a sexual relationship, not just a marital relationship. How many times have we interacted with a grandmother, and we have sat down and we have had a conversation with her for a couple of hours, and we have walked away enlightened about something. Okay? We all benefit from that kind of interaction, okay, because we learn a lot from women, just like women learn a lot from men. And these kind of interactions are often intergenerational, and Muslim men deserve to have this kind of interaction with others. And no society should be segregated, and it should come together. So for someone to uh, argue that hijab is a choice, it's an absolutely cruel argument. Then the next argument is that any reform should only come from within, or why are you Hindus bothered with the hijab? We won't be bothering with it today if the leftists and others had spoken up in defense of the Muslim women. You did not. So now we are going to do that. So, and second, as I pointed out, over the last 1200 years, Islam has not been able to reform itself from within. That being the case, there is no reason to presume that it will reform itself in the near future. And why should we tolerate the suffering and oppression of millions of Muslim women based on this baseless hope? And finally, is the hijab essential to the practice of Islam? It is. And so is the stoning of the adulteress to death. And we are not allowing one, so we don't have to allow the other. So all I would say is, let's work towards legislating and eradicating the hijab. And hijab is, as I pointed out, simply a symbol. Okay, hijab does not exist in a void. For example, if you look at Muslim men, many of them will wear trousers that are above the ankle. Watch the videos of Zakir Naik, for example. Okay, he'll be wearing a suit, but then the trousers won't go up to the ankle. It will stop above the ankle because, in one of the hadiths, Prophet Muhammad says that whatever is below the ankle belongs to the hell. Okay, so that's why he wouldn't be wearing a trouser. Then he can wear an upper garment that will go below that, and then he says that's all right because I am not arrogant. Okay, in other words, a Muslim man is allowed to wear trousers that go below the ankle only if he's not arrogant. All of this is completely absurd, but these are the kind of absurdities that govern the day-to-day living of Muslims, and that's pitiable, that's pathetic, and that's something we should work against. And it cannot begin, and we cannot realize these goals unless we start tackling these things. I think, to me, hijab is only a symbol. It's a symbol of one of the most oppressive and most perverted, most illogical, most unscientific, and most harmful lifestyle that the world has ever seen. And it's not just the hijab that we should ban, it's only the starting point. We should ban all the madrasas. What can be the justification to allow 960 madrasas, all supported with taxpayer money, in the state of Karnataka alone? How can we condemn millions of Muslim girls and children to this kind of lifestyle? We should start banning those things. And we need a critique of Islam. If a critique of Islam could exist 1000 years ago, if Al-Mari could write a critique of Islam in the form of a book, or if somebody could paint, even right after the time of Aurangzeb, paint a picture of Muhammad riding the Burak to heaven, and today we have given up. In other words, thanks to the conditioning and the unreasonable demands made by the leftists, because they invoke the word Islamophobia at the drop of the hat, we have given up all of these things. When we give up a critique and ridicule of Islam, and we give up legislating against Islam, we are condemning Muslim women to perpetual slavery, and that's unacceptable. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Venkatji, for the wonderful presentation. Before I move on to the questions, I'd like to ask a point that I have been wondering about throughout your discussion. and that is the leftist and the feminist. They fight for the right of Muslim women to wear a hijab in India, and everywhere else in Muslim countries, they fight for the right to not wear a hijab. So why is this hypocrisy in the narrative of feminism and leftism?
So there are two different types of leftists and feminists we are looking here. Okay, so the leftists or feminists, not all of them, only some of them. In India, leftists and feminists are not fighting for the rights of Muslim women. Okay, they have always joined hands with the mullahs and the most regressive elements. Okay, however, in other Muslim countries, because India is a democracy, in a free country, they always take the side of the most regressive characters. That's what feminists and leftists always do. Okay, except in France, where feminists have had the courage to condemn hijab publicly. Okay, I think this has been happening from 2004, I think. But there are two types of leftists slash feminists. Okay, in some of the Muslim countries, they are really suffering. Okay, so somebody who gives up Islam, somebody who doesn't want to wear the hijab, they are persecuted, so they are willing to fight. But the leftists and feminists in the Western world or India or living in the cool comforts of their home. They have had the most privileged upbringing. Okay, so they have all the freedom to go to the best universities. They can go to the Indian Institute of Management, the IITs, wherever they want. They could study and they could drive their cars. They could buy homes. They could marry whoever they want. They could date whoever they want, and they are going and supporting the most regressive fundamentalists within the Islamic community. Why? The same thing happens in the US too. Why? Because for the leftists and feminists, feminists have. I want to be careful about feminists for a minute. Okay, so there are different types of feminists, but most of them are silent. They may find the hijab to be repulsive, but they don't speak up. Okay, and because they don't speak up, because the moment they do, they are called Islamophobic. So many of them silence themselves. Okay, but there are also politically motivated feminists who are quite substantial in number. Okay, and then they do these things along with the leftists because they treat the Muslims as a vote bank. Okay, so for them, it's okay to keep Muslim women under shackles, throw them under the bus, let them suffer, let millions of them suffer, so that they can come and vote for the Democratic Party in the US or the Congress in India or the left parties in Kerala. Okay, so this is the always been the worldview of the leftists or feminists. So by default, we should not assume that the leftists or feminists care for freedom. They don't. So leftist feminist ideology is totalitarian by nature, and hence they find quite at ease collaborating with the mullahs, with the obscurantist elements, with the hijabis and others, because that creates a vote bank for them.
Thank you for the answer. Now I would like to ask Aruna ji. She has been interested in asking a few questions to you. Aruna ji, would you, unmute yourself,
Yes,
please?
yes.
Thank you.
I unmuted. Yeah, my main question is, I'm in America, and most of the thing when we come to the problem, it starts with funding. So who are these leftists and who are funding them? Because unless government stop this funding by either by trade or something like that, as it happened in Malaysia, they work with the trade, and the next day and next week or next day, the other guy who was the president, he was removed. And now they are working to bring Zakir Naik to India to do all those things. So the bottom line comes to the funding. And this is basically what we see here, that not even in India, in America, and also they are trying to break the fabrics of India with feminists, with leftists, with all those kind of things, so that they can break India and they can do whatever they want to. And many countries and many
could you please come to the question? So I'm kind of losing.
Yeah. So my main question is, who is funding and who are these leftists? Who created these leftists? And how we can stop?
I mean, the creation of the left is a product of communism. Okay, so and then the left has been around for more than a century now. Okay, ever since the Soviet Union came and the August 17th revolution and other things happened, it has been taking deep roots everywhere. So, and their funding itself comes from multiple sources, but one of them is from the most radical Islamist sources. One example is the Saudi government. So let me take one example. In the year, I think 2008 or 9, Saudi Arabia created an endowment with $55 million at Harvard. Okay, and Saudi Arabia is one of the most oppressive nations on the planet, and the reason they do create such endowments is, they want to make sure that the professors who are teaching and researching Islam are hardcore Muslims. Okay, and then and what's the reason for that? For the reason for that comes from a recent speech and a letter written by an email written by Yasir Qadhi. Okay, so Yasir Qadhi is a Pakistani American ultra conservative Muslim. Okay, he's a Salafist. He used to be a Salafist and a Wahhabist, and today he has given up Wahhabism because he recently compared in one of his videos. He compared Wahhabism with ISIS. He says there is no difference between the two. Okay, the way Wahhab acted and the way ISIS acts today are identical. So, but he points out he studied in Medina. Okay, he studied in Medina for several years. Then he comes to Yale University to do his PhD. So he writes that his very first experience was one of shock. He came very close to the crisis of faith because he said all the cutting edge research in Islam had been done by non-Muslims in the Western world. Okay, and that has and you have many scholars who have done that, right? It starts with John Wansbrough, Goldziher, and many others, and all the way down to someone like Shadi Nazir and other scholars of today. Okay, so practically all of the rigorous research has been carried out by non-Muslims, Westerners particularly, and in contrast, the Islamic narrative is simplistic and unconvincing to anyone. So for the first time when he experiences the critique written by the Westerners in the academy, he experiences something which is close to the crisis of faith. Okay, and I don't think he's the only one. Okay, he himself talks about a dozen academics he knows of who have gone through this. Okay, all Muslims having crisis of faith, and then this is something the Islamic establishment, like the government of Saudi Arabia, which has been the source funding Wahhabism, is fully aware of. That's why when they pump $55 million into Harvard University, what are they trying to do? They are trying to make sure that in the years to come, they will have their hand-picked characters who will become professors and researchers, and they can control the narrative in the academy. So that is the motive, and that's the source of funding for the leftists and the Islamists who are driving this narrative.
Yeah, just so what is the solution? Because the Saudi is still, the oil is in a play, and one of the richest countries, the Middle East countries, because of the oil.
I got it.
Solution?
So I got your answer. I got your question. See, the solution is exactly what I was articulating. Okay, the first one, in the West, you cannot even criticize Islam without getting accused of being Islamophobic. Okay, you will be cancelled and you will lose your job, and all of these things will happen. Okay, even for a reasonable criticism. So the very first thing I think, the very first thing you should do is in India, since we are talking in the context of India, and here what you have to do is start legislating. We have not got a single legislation in favor of Hindus. Okay, and first of all, if you criticize Islam, somebody can arrest you and throw you behind the bars in India, because there are primitive laws that have been written in the constitution, and we have not abrogated a single of those laws. I think the first thing we should do is to, if at all we have a Hindu government, the first thing it should do is to scrap all of these laws. Okay, feel free to insult any religion. Okay, it doesn't matter, and then you cannot be persecuted for that. Because if you don't have the freedom of speech, you cannot get Muslims to give up Islam. That's number one. Then number two is going to be shut down every single madrasa. Okay, and what's the point of having the BJP govern the country, govern many states, if you are continuing to fund the madrasas? Shut them down. Okay, and third, we have to generate a counter narrative. That's the exact reason I brought up the example of no hood, no hijab. Okay, so next time somebody says, oh, hijab is a choice, who are you to come and tell a woman what to wear and what not to wear? Then just tell her it is as much of a choice as wearing the hood is. Okay, if you come to work wearing a KKK hood, then you'll be kicked out. It's the same here. Okay, make that equation that will force people to look at those parallels. We have to create the narrative. We have not done it. In fact, the only ones who have created these good narratives are either ex-Muslims, like the Apostate Prophet and many others I was mentioning, or some of the really good Western academics like Fred Donner, okay, or Patricia Crona. She did some of the most cutting edge work on that. And third one, some of the Christian apologists. Okay, some of the Christian apologists have literally gone through the Islamic narratives, the fine tooth comb, and then they have created a lot of counter narrative. And we have to do those things. So there are no shortcuts, but these are things we need to do. And if we do that, we can end Islam.
But it is a long way. So
it is a long way. There are no shortcuts, but it doesn't have to be a long way. Okay.
But UCC, Uniform Civil Code, could it be a shortcut that once it is brought, then everything for everybody?
No. There are no shortcuts. First of all, I think legislating is easy. Okay. So the BJP has majority in both houses and they can legislate. Number one. Okay. The things I call for are easy to legislate. But just because you legislate, the Muslim fundamentalists are not going to accept the law and continue. Okay, so they will riot and they will protest. So if Hindus care about the future, if we want a civil society, we should be ready to fight against that for a long time to come. By fight, I do not mean getting into street fights and Hindus versus Muslims. That's a very reprehensible thing to do. Okay, I would rather want the government to legislate and then the government to crack down. Okay, go after the mullahs. Okay, throw them behind the bars, even as a preventive arrest, throw them behind the bar and go after all the Islamic organizations and the madrasas and the folks who are running it, throw them behind the bar. Let a few hundred of them languish behind the bar. It's okay to sacrifice a few, save millions of Muslims, because otherwise these are predators. Okay, that's what we need to do. But there are no shortcuts. Okay, we cannot just hope to, type on the keyboard and hope the problem to disappear. It won't.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you go to the next question? I think somebody might have written a lot of questions in the chat.
We have another question from Gayatri ji, and I would like to invite her to ask a question directly to you.
Okay.
She has posted a question in the chat.
Got it. And
he is here.
Sure. And a request for all the participants, please make your questions brief. That way more people can ask questions. So don't speak a lot of preamble and don't make statements. Please come to the question directly. Gayatri ji, please. You're speaking on mute.
Yeah, you are on mute, Gayatri ji. Unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now you can hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. I have two questions. One is, why do Muslim women not give up Islam?
Yeah.
Because this cult considers women as subhumans
I understood.
and sex slaves.
Yeah.
So why is there no a revolt from? How does it sustain itself? So that is one question. And the other question is, Western feminism has had a role in weakening Christianity in the West. And we had the same effect on Hinduism in India. So why doesn't Islam face the same effect? So these two questions.
Perfect. Thank you. And then the first one, right? Why do not Muslim women revolt? Okay. So it comes at a very high price. So take a Muslim woman in Afghanistan. And then I quoted the example, a 20-year-old woman, she committed no crime. All she did was to wear a pair of jeans rather than wear the hijab. And she was publicly executed by the Taliban. Okay. So, and we all do the cost benefit analysis, even subconsciously, and we are not going to revolt if we have to pay with our lives for that. Okay. So that's the first and foremost reason. A Muslim woman would be shunned by the family, and then a Muslim woman would be executed in many of the Muslim countries, and she'll be cancelled by the leftist feminist cancel culture. Okay, a woman who speaks up against Islam will be cancelled by the leftists and feminists right away. So on every front, a Muslim woman will pay a huge price. That's why they don't revolt. Now, this is only those Muslim women who have discerned and who have understood Islam for what it is, and who have taken a stance against it. But a vast majority of Muslim women don't even mm, uh, 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 cannot even articulate how pernicious and how harmful Islam is, because they don't know anything about Islam. Okay, they are not taught anything. They are only brainwashed in the madrasas. They receive bare minimal education in schools. They don't come into contact with the rest of society. They are segregated all the time, and because of that, they don't have a worldview which is anywhere close to an enlightened worldview. And they may think if the husband is throwing her out of the home by pronouncing the talaq thrice, all they can do is to think my husband is a terrible human being. Okay, but then they don't extend that, and then they don't correlate that with the teachings of the Quran, the teachings of the Hadiths and the Sunnah. All of that led to her plight, and they cannot make that connection because they have been taught from childhood not to question Quran, not to question Allah, not to question the Prophet. Okay, so this brainwashing is very powerful. That's why I brought up the example of the FLDS church. There are young girls, who will be married off to very, very old men, and they will be sex slaves in a polygamous marriage. But when the police and other researchers went to them, all of them said, or most of them said, no, we chose to be part of this marriage, and why are you breaking our families? Okay, so people who have never experienced freedom will find it very, very difficult to relate to freedom and live with it. And I'm not a fan of Javed Akhtar. I think he's a hypocrite, but then he made one very good tweet. Okay, he said hijab is oppressive even if the hijabi, meaning the hijab wearing woman, doesn't realize she is being oppressed. Next question.
Okay.
Yeah, can I ask a question? My name is Brit Sharma.
Yeah.
Is somebody ahead of me to ask a question? I'll have mine.
Oh, no, please proceed.
Okay. Now the question is, I just wanted to kind of, clear this thinking that with me and with other people, then a couple of years ago, many, many years ago, even Pope said that Islam is a violent religion. Okay, it teaches violence. The origin of Islam happened to be violent, out of violence. Okay, Muhammad, how he created, he did not like this idol worship, and he created.
Yeah. Could you please come to the question directly?
The question is that we should, as kind of create a narrative, just like Gayatri said, that why women should leave Islam because they are.
And what's the question?
That's not a question. That the question is that how we can kind of bring the Hindus to the light, to unite each other. Okay, and of course I listened to Kulshrestha, Pushpendra.
No, I think if you keep the question brief, more people can ask question. Please don't substantiate. I get the question. So it's a question: how can we unite the Hindus to critique Islam?
How can we unite the Hindus and tell and educate them? For even for example, the books that we read, we were never taught about bows.
No, I understand. You don't have to qualify. You don't have to qualify.
How that can be addressed?
Yeah, I think it's. I think Hindus are also one of the most ignorant people. Okay, Hindus are ignorant of their own religion, their own culture and traditions, and they are equally ignorant of other religions like Islam or Christianity. Okay, so and I think the only way today Hindus unite is when they see a huge public threat from Islam or Christianity, then for the moment they tend to unite. Okay, so I don't think uniting Hindus is feasible simply because of the way Hinduism is structured. Okay, Hinduism is not an organized religion. It's not a congregational religion. You don't have a mosque or a church where somebody gives a sermon to 2,000 people, 5,000 people and unites them. And those things don't happen in Hinduism. So no, it doesn't happen in Hinduism. However, the right approach to take is there was a philosopher called Hannah Arendt. Okay, so she wrote about totalitarianism. And then she said, most of the time, the initiatives are driven by a handful of people. Okay, so it doesn't require all of society, but a handful of people working closely with the government and legislating to ban the hijab, to ban the burqa, to ban trousers that go above the ankle, okay, or the beard which is fist length and no mustache. Okay, ban all those things. Okay, all of those things should be banned because those are part of an exploitative ideology, a pernicious ideology, and ban all the madrasas, legislate. Okay, then once it is done, then it's the job of the government to make sure that the Muslims, a section of Muslims, the fundamentalists, don't go about rioting and deal with it. So you cannot unite the Hindus, and I don't even think it's desirable to unite people on the basis of religion. The beauty of Hinduism or Buddhism or Jainism is that these religions, or for the reason Taoism and other religions, is that these religions are very individualistic. They allow you to explore the nature of reality. You can call it moksha, you can call it nirvana, whatever it is, and that will be the first victim when people start uniting under a religious umbrella. Okay, I think what we need to do is we need to treat Islam as a cancer, and then think of any intervention as a chemotherapy or a radiation to cure it.
Okay, just a quick follow-up question. As you said, treat Islam as a cancer.
Yeah, only question. Okay, so
Just
please,
only one
yes,
question. Just
yes.
a note. Just like that, you probably heard that when this singer, that one of the singer, I forgot his name, there was a kind of somebody said, "Oh, I will give a reward if you shave his head." Some Muslim guy. Okay, and right now, 3 days ago, a lady of Samajwad Party said that if somebody touches our hijab, we will cut their hands. Now the thing is that why the Hindus have not been a kind of that aggressive. For example,
We
why
should not
why-
be.
why-
I think
will that be okay? That if
no, it is
just
not
me-
okay. It's not okay, right? See, I think here's the problem, right? So I understand why the Hindus in Karnataka are protesting now. Okay, because if you go to Karnataka, I've been talking to. I gave a few examples of how Kashmir was ruined, how the coastal regions of South India have been ruined because of the rise of Islam. Same thing happening in Bengal. That's more of Islamic radicalism happening. Same thing in the coastal regions of Karnataka. If you go to northern Kerala to southern Karnataka, pretty much, it's as if you have entered Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. Okay, it's that bad. So
Venkatji,
now,
Venkatji, sorry to interrupt you, but we have other people waiting for with their questions. I think
all right.
we should
Thank you.
take them up.
Please, yeah.
Okay,
And
that's
yeah,
fine.
And a request for everyone, please don't make statements. Don't start with a lot of preamble. One line question, please.
we have Dr. Bharadwaj. Sir, please ask your question now.
Yeah, I would like to ask him that can we take the route of understanding all the religions through science and logic without mentioning any religion?
No,
Which
no,
really
no.
would
I
be
got
very
it. No. You cannot. Okay, because science explains the temporal phenomenon. Okay, and then we there are many aspects of religion that could be understood by science. Okay, so practically everything that's stated in Islam or Christianity could be easily understood by science. A lot of the claims that are made within Hinduism can also be understood by science, but there are a few things which we cannot yet understand using science. So, for example, there are practices like ayahuasca. Okay, then there are practices within Hinduism, like some of the Kundalini experiments and other things. Okay, so they open the doors. So, for example, I don't know whether any of you has ever tried psilocybin shrooms or DMT or other things, and have you practiced those techniques, which I have done a lot. Okay, and I think kindly mute yourself if you're not, except the one who asking question. Others kindly mute yourself. So in those cases, science is not a sufficient enough tool, and what you really need is science. Will explain most of the things, but then there are realities. It's possible that it may not be entirely explained by science. So I don't want to entirely privilege science. And again, not mentioning the name of the religion, I think it's just a cop out, because I have never heard of a Jaina woman who blew herself up. Okay, and I have
would
never
like to
heard.
say-
No, hang on, please. Let me finish the answer. Okay,
Okay,
so don't interrupt. Okay, so
please.
I have never heard of a Jaina woman who has blown herself up. Okay, so that being the case, we should have the courage and honesty to say, just because I'm criticizing Islam does not mean I'm going to equate Islam with all the other religions. Okay, every religion should be examined by its own merits and demerits.
So what I was saying, that say, for example, now the visible universe is visible through the science. We have seen that this is one body, together, the huge big cosmos, with floating material bodies, the universe.
No,
is going to
what's the, I'm very
Point
familiar.
is-
Yeah.
Point is
Dr.
telling
Bharadwaj, sorry to interrupt you, but I think we are going off topic.
Yeah.
So
My request, I don't want to cut off anyone asking the question, but I would like you to just ask the question. Don't make statements and, don't go off the topic, please. Okay. So next question, please.
next question we have Aruna ji. She has raised her hand again, and I would like to invite
Can
her
we go to
ask a
others and
question.
come back? Can we go to others and come back to her so that the same person doesn't ask all the questions? And for everyone, I'll request you, either you ask the question very briefly or just write it down briefly and in 1 or 2 lines and
Okay.
ask the question.
We have another person. I don't know their name because they have the symbol HP for their handle. I would like to ask the request them
As
to
moderator,
ask the
can you
question.
just read the question briefly for me so that I'll respond to it?
There is no question written here.
Oh, then ignore it.
They have just raised their hand.
Okay, all right. Is there a brief question, HP? Okay, doesn't look like.
I don't think they are in any mood to ask a question. Then we have another person, BMW, with a handle, interesting handle. BMW, I think, yeah, BMW. Sir, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. I
Please.
think with the amount of investment India is doing, or India is being put into about Islam, I think we should start a debate on: is there a reason, or can we ban Islam? In other
We
words,
should. Well, look, if we have banned other evil ideologies, we have, right? Like Nazism has been banned. Okay, Islam is just an ideology. It just happens to be a religious ideology and not a political ideology. Okay, and as far as I am concerned, a harmful and evil ideology should be suppressed and banned. And it's not just my take; it's the take of the great Kashmiri logician Nayayika Jayanta Bhatta. Okay, he wrote a book called Agamadambara. In that he says it's the duty of a ruler to suppress religions that are harmful. Okay, because as an Ayayika, he realized that not every human being is capable of evaluating religion, and certain religion. Friends, please mute yourself. Okay, and then he realized that some of the religions are extremely harmful and they act as mimetic viruses. Of course, he did not know the term mimetic virus at the time. And then he said, in those cases, if a religion is harmful, it should be suppressed. And we do it all the time. So, for example, in India or the US or Europe, Muslim clergy cannot stone an adulteress to death. Okay, even though that's what Islam recommends, that's what Islam mandates. Okay, and which means we have effectively banned that practice. And in the United States, a Muslim cannot marry 4 women, and he cannot take unlimited number of concubines as sex slaves, even though those are all approved and mandated by Islam. Okay, so in other words, we are banning aspects of Islam, and it's up to the Muslims, and can they salvage some aspect of Islam which is beneficial, and can they practice it, or does the entire ship sink? But that's the answer.
I think that's what we should look for in India.
Yeah, thank you. Next question.
For the next question, we have Brij Sharma ji. He had raised his hand, but I think he has no.
If it is the same person, let's skip. We'll come back to that.
I already asked my question. Thank you.
All right,
Okay,
thanks.
so the only person left is Aruna ji. She
No, hang on. I think a lot of questions somebody has typed in the comment section.
They are more like comments. Maybe you are getting it in your direct chat.
Okay,
We have this comment by Divakar ji, but it is a comment, not
okay.
a
If it's
question.
comment, please skip questions. And also, by the way, few Muslim apologists and Dawa folks wanted to challenge me, and I'm here. Bring it on, guys. Don't be shy.
Before we move there, we have a new person, Indrani ji.
Indrani ji, namaste.
Indrani ji,
Do you have a question?
Indrani ji, please ask your question. She is on mute.
All right. All right, let's move on.
Yeah. So Aruna ji is still waiting to ask a question.
Yeah, please jump to the question, Aruna ji.
Aruna ji, please ask your question.
All right, there's a question from Desi Sevlai. Okay, will not banning lead to a civil war? Probably it will. Okay, so what's the option? Okay, it's not something we want. Okay, but then
Oh dear.
let me finish. Let me finish, please. Mute yourself. Mute yourself. Mute yourself. Okay, and then yes, it could lead to civil war. Okay, because Islam is pernicious. It has completely warped the worldview of large number of Muslims, and then there is a radicalized section that will take to civil war. What's the option? You will just let this continue, and then we will lose one society after another. That's not an option. So my way of dealing with it is, I think there's a way to solve for that. That's why we should listen to the Muslim apostates, because many of them are fighting a brave battle. Okay, and then we should listen to them, and then they share a lot of very good insight. And then I think through a set of legislation and by simply exposing them to modernity, we can or get rid of Islam altogether. But the civil war is always a possibility. That's why I would like the government to crack down on the most likely ringleaders who are probably going to start such a war and throw them behind the prison. Indrani ji, over to you. You're speaking on
Yeah, I'm
mute.
sorry. The superstition law in India, can that be applied? Has anybody applied it to Islam?
Sorry?
The superstition law against superstition, has that been applied to Islam?
No, it has not been. And so generally when it has, so in India, when the leftists or even rationalists, when they take on superstition, they only target the Hindu superstition, and then they don't target Islamic or Christian superstition because they are scared. Okay, and this is true of even celebrities. For example, the Nobel Prize winner Venki Ramakrishnan, he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. That he goes to India, I think he goes to IIT Madras, I think, and where he talks about how superstitious astrology is. Okay, but is it more harmful? It may or may not be a superstition. I do not know. I have not studied astrology, but assuming it is, now what about other superstitions? Okay, like the virgin birth, or the resurrection, or the second coming of Jesus, or Muhammad riding on a horse to heaven overnight and returning, and all of the Islamic beliefs and everything, throwing stone at the Kaaba. All of these things are rank superstitions, but he won't talk about those things, because if he did, he will be pummeled in the media. He'll be pummeled by the leftists. So he knows that. So he knows it's easy. You don't pay a price for mocking the Hindus, because Hinduism is not an organized religion. There are a few Hindus who will come and complain, but the rest won't. So that's the reason they do that. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I would like to add my view on this. Basically, I believe that all religions, they are based on superstition. And it is only our Sanatan that is actually based on an ideology that is pervasive, that is inclusive, that is diverse. But all religions, since they are man-made constructs, they need to have a very big share of superstition to make them, beyond reproach of public, the people they are trying to brainwash. If you look at any cult, they function quite similarly to how religions function. The only difference is that the cult leader is living, and in a religion, the cult leader is dead. And in both cases, they are beyond reproach. They are beyond questioning. They are beyond everything. Their word is
I think Mark Twain.
Yeah.
I think it was Mark Twain who said it, right? He said, the first religion was born when a charlatan met a useful idiot. Okay, so that's true of most of the religions, most of the religious beliefs, not all. Okay,
not all, but yes, it's quite common. Yeah. So we have another message.
I think we are already into an hour 40 minutes. So if there's any serious question, I can take it. Otherwise, can we close the call?
I think I would like to ask HPG to ask their question. We have Divakar ji. Divakar ji, please ask your question.
Namaste, Kalava ji. I was just looking at Europe from a perspective of how it has changed, especially the same Wahhabization. When I speak to colleagues here, they have themselves seen in the last 20 years, actually the increase in number of people wearing the scarf or the hijab tremendously high. So so-called developed or educated continent, with all its conservatism in the other side, do you think the liberals and open-minded people within Europe will be able to work on the Islamists, because they seem to be going much more faster in Europe than in India?
No, they won't be. In fact, there are studies that are conducted in UK. Okay, so I do not about other countries. I looked at studies conducted in France. I looked at studies conducted in UK. In UK, they contrasted two studies that are conducted over, I think, 10 or 11 years. Okay, 2014 and 2016, something like that. Okay, so 2004, 2016. So the first study focused on the first generation Muslim immigrants to UK. Okay, and then the second study focused on the first generation that was born in UK. Okay, so the UK, and the finding was startling. The UK born Muslims were way more conservative than the parents who had migrated to UK. Okay, and many of them supported the Sharia, and many of them believed that the women belonged in the household, and then she has to wear the hijab and hundreds of other things. Okay, so I think what is happening is many of them are getting indoctrinated in the Islamic schools and the cells and other places and in the mosques. Okay, and then since the most revolting idea of religious freedom. Okay, and I don't think anybody ever questions why is religious freedom more important than freedom. Okay, nobody questions raises that question. Okay, so because when you talk about religious freedom, it's easy to get your vote back. Okay, because the only ones who are getting always excited about religious freedom are the Abrahamics, okay, Christians and Muslims, and okay, because they are congregational. And when you talk about religious freedom, it's a euphemism for, look, I've got the numbers, I want power disproportionate to my numbers. Okay, that's what religious freedom dialogue is all about. Okay, but nobody in the West talks about freedom. Okay, why should we tolerate religious freedom when it violates the freedom of a Muslim woman? Okay, the reason for that is Westerners have never had a very deep a philosophical inquiry. It's only in the recent years, the likes of Sam Harris and others, starting, I think a lot of it started in the 1950s and 60s, right? It started with, Aldous Huxley and Timothy Leary and others coming up with a good perspective. And before that, it happened in bits and pieces. For example, who's that mathematician and then philosopher? Alfred North Whitehead from Harvard, right? Those people brought up because they were all heavily influenced by Vedanta, Buddhism, and other things. But barring that, okay, the West has never had, particularly the US and the UK, the English-speaking world has never had a deep perspective into philosophy and the aspects of life and all of these things. They don't really have a concept of freedom. They're reactionary. Okay, they react against Christianity. Okay, they react against white racism. Okay, and then they swing, the pendulum swings to the opposite side, and that's not introspection, that's not philosophical thinking. Okay, and most of them are just conditioned people. At the surface level, they may look diametrically opposite, but beyond that, there's not much to tell one apart from the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Most welcome.
We have two more raised hands, BMW and HP, but I don't know whether they wish to ask their questions or make a comment. And if they don't wish to ask a question, then I think we should move to the conclusion, because it's already been 2.5 hours, 2 hours now.
I do have the question. Let me ask.
Okay, sir. Please ask your question.
Okay, so earlier you had stated that Islam is the cancer and chemotherapy is the solution. Can we start the chemotherapy with small countries, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and show how prosperous they would become by banning Islam? If we can start with those small countries and India can empower those countries?
No, that will be all too late, because smaller countries don't have the wherewithal to fight, fight Islamic radicalism. So I think, and second, the trajectory from fighting Islamic fundamentalism to making the society prosperous is a long trajectory. And by the time it happens, we would have lost more and more millions and millions of Muslim women to Islam. So no, that's not an option. I think the bottom line is this, right? Do Hindus think, do they understand, do they realize that Islam poses a threat to freedom? Okay, and then the leftists and feminists who are shielding Islam and inventing bogus arguments, or they posing a threat to freedom? Okay, if you realize it, then you fight it. The way to fight, I've already kind of started articulating. Number one is to legislate against very obvious things like triple talaq, which you have done, and extend that to hijab, extend that to trousers that stop above the ankle, extend that to beard but no mustache, and all of these things, because then cut out all the subsidy for Hajj and all these things. Then second, abrogate all the laws that will prevent you from criticizing Islam. And if we do that, then everybody starts talking about these things, and then that will weaken Islam. Then more importantly, go after the ringleaders. There's no other way you can save this. Okay, there are no two ways about it. Okay, so we know who are running this show, right? So the Dawa folks, the people who are running the mosques, the people who are part of a set of NGOs and who are heavily funded and they drive the show, go after them, throw them behind the bars. Okay, I think at the end of the day, it's a moral question. Okay, are you willing to throw a few hundred behind the bars to save millions? Because these few hundred are the ones who are poisoning society. Do it. Then,
let me ask the question again, if you don't mind. Okay, all I'm saying is, can we empower? India can empower a small country like Nepal. We can't empower India right now, but we can empower a small country like Nepal.
I mean, why would if you are the Nepalese prime minister, and let's say Prime Minister Modi goes and tells him, look, let me empower you to fight the Islamic menace, what will be his response? Okay, have you empowered yourself, Mr. Modi? Because as I can see, you are not able to tackle the Islamic menace yourself, and the day you succeed, come and talk to me.
Well, Modi can empower himself as well as Nepal.
So start with him, then start with India, right? So do it in India, legislate. Okay, I'm saying this legislation is not difficult. Okay, you have the numbers. Why are you not legislating?
I agree with you. Legislation is easy.
Correct. Legislate and enforce the law. That's it.
I think instead of trying to go with the Sharia and the hijab and niqab and all that, we should look at the bigger picture. Let's try to ban Islam, because Islam has become a problem for everybody, including freedom of the world. For a larger picture, I think we should look at banning Islam.
I'm in agreement that I already stated that. Okay, I don't buy this argument of religious freedom. I think religious freedom is only acceptable insofar as it does not threaten freedom. It's a small subset of freedom. Okay, so I'm all for banning religions, not just Islam. Any religion or aspect of any religion, whenever it threatens freedom, whenever it threatens enlightenment.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
We have two more raised hands, new hands. One is, I think, they are repeat questions. We have Gayatri ji again asking a question, and we have Aruna ji. So would you like to take
and
the
for
questions?
everyone, please keep the questions really brief. One line question, please.
So my question is that you have mentioned that legislation can play a good role, but with the government system is made with the old British system. So the legislation can come like majority and then can come again like a previous government. So that, and they will dismantle the legislation. So how we can implicate the legislation so that it will continue?
No, I don't think it's, first of all, I think legislating is very easy. Okay, if you have the numbers and if you don't legislate, that means it's intellectual laziness or complete lack of understanding of reality. Okay, and second, it's not easy to dismantle legislation, because the one who does that will have to have a massive majority. Okay, the next government has to have a massive majority. I'm not aware of too many cases where one government legislates and the other one comes and simply reverses it, right? Those things don't happen. I think the simple point is, Hindus and in particular the BJP have not realized what really needs to be done here. Okay, so I think instead of getting hypothetical, we should just realize the reality that we have not done anything. Okay, so except for the Hindus, except whining, they have not done anything. They just whine. They talk about, oh my God, they are doing all these things. But then why don't you legislate? Why it's your tax dollar that's going to, or tax rupees that's going to them? Every temple has been taken over by the government. Okay, and then the donations that go to the temple, Hindu temples, are taken and spent on Islamic mosques, Hajj pilgrimage, Christian churches, and everything. And still we don't want to legislate. Okay, so if we remain apathetic, we cannot just, if we just whine, we don't do anything more than that, we cannot get into hypotheticals.
Yeah, I have another follow-up question. Something you mentioned, ruler to suppress. So how we can bring the parties to suppress that thing? Because you mentioned they don't understand because we have been enslaved.
So see, the bottom line is this, right? So this is a problem which is so easy for everyone to understand. Okay, and if still somebody doesn't understand, so we have, look, the BJP has massive majority in both houses. Okay, so we have the most popular prime minister ever, or even a world leader. Okay, going by some of the global surveys. Okay, and at this stage, we should not be talking about bringing the parties together. It's not as if we are lacking the numbers. We need to bring anyone to do that. Okay, so it's just that there is no understanding of the problems, there is no understanding of the threat, and then there is no political resolve to legislate and make India a better place. And everyone is just trying to be a hanger-on and exploit the situation a little bit here and there and move on. So I don't think the problem is the numbers or it's a political.
Gayatri ji, now would you like to ask a question?
Yeah. First of all, not all forms of talaq has banned, only triple talaq has been banned.
Correct.
So we need to ban all the forms of talaq. And we can do simply well by just banning polygamy. Even that is not being done.
Correct.
So that is one thing. So Kalwai ji, I would like to ask you, why is it that even Hindu parties, so-called Hindu parties, are always pandering to Islam? What can we do to change the situation? That's my question.
So I think the problem is this, right? Until 1947, India was a colonized nation. Okay, and the first colonizing happened 1200 years ago. Okay, and India has, for the most part, remained colonized. Yes, there were pockets of resistance, like Vema Reddy in the 13th century. Then you had the Vijayanagara Empire. Then you had Shivaji, and all of these things happened. Okay, but then they were not pan-India phenomenon. Okay, so they were usually geographic or confined to certain regions or confined to certain times. For example, Vijayanagara Empire, I think, lasted for what, 260, 270 years, okay, out of the last 1200. So in other words, most of the Hindu psyche has been one of a subjugated colonized person. That's number one. Then number two, in 1947, when India becomes free, it was a dirt poor country. Okay, what used to be one of the richest nations on the planet before the British arrived became one of the poorest nations on the planet when they left in 1947. So people who are suffering from abject poverty would just try to survive and live for the day and not think about the bigger problems. Then the third problem is India's literacy rate in 1947 was 13%, 1-3. And literacy rate means someone could just sign their names. That's it. Okay, nothing more than that. It does not mean those people had the requisite skills to survive in the modern world or to survive in the emerging world of the future. Okay, they did not have any of those things. That's why for nearly 25-30 years, India was literally starving and trying to import foods, going to everyone with the begging bowl and all these things. So, and I think the problem is when a society comes out of this kind of a predation, what it requires is a good leader. Okay, like what Israel and a few other countries had. Okay, Israelis came out of the gas chambers, but luckily they had good leaders. Okay, those leaders had were discerning, and then they had a sense of self-worth, and then they were visionaries, and then they were willing to guide their country. Okay, India never had such a leader. Okay, all of the Indian leaders, like the Congress, were nominated by the British. That's why they came to power. Okay, and then they were mostly collaborators, nothing more than that. Okay, so and then they did not allow any critical thinking, okay, any teaching, and instead all kinds of nonsense like, Sarva Dharma Samabhava and all these things are taught. And then, the notion of minority was invented, completely disregarding the fact that Hindus don't even constitute majority. Okay, because Hindus are divided by languages, by sects, by different jatis or caste, whatever you want to call those. And then they never vote as a bloc, and they can never vote as a bloc. And then since they are not congregational, they cannot be mobilized on the basis of religion. Okay, but even this very simple point, nobody challenged. And then just because the West talked about majority and minority, the initial leaders, because they were no more than gumaste, who were carrying the briefcase for the white man. That's what Nehru and all of those acolytes were. And then they introduced a culture, and we have not ever reversed it. And when BJP came to power, on certain fronts, especially on economy and building infrastructure, they've done a great job. But in terms of preserving Indian culture or fighting these kind of predations, okay, they have not done anything, because I don't believe they understand anything of that sort either. Okay, so so it's fundamentally a problem of deep-rooted ignorance and a pervasive ignorance in Hindu society. We're almost at the 2-hour mark. I think we should stop unless there's one last question.
We should have HPG ask his question, because he has raised his hand many times, but somehow there is some problem with his connection.
Thank you so much. I'm not too sure why my name and the video is not showing. I've switched on both. Anyway, my question is there a legislative framework of Hindus, and I'm not saying Indians, Hindus, ethnically Hindus across the world and in India, where there's a framework to protect Hindus against certain narratives on social media, against certain crimes, which are performed only because you're a Hindu, in these criminal acts, even Hindus themselves are involved. So I'm saying that, is there a framework of legislative framework of Hindus to protect Hindu ethnicity across the world, especially India?
I do not know the answer for that because I'm not an attorney or a lawyer. So sorry, I don't know the answer.
We have one last person. Desi ji, would you like to ask your question now?
Thank you, Ji. Namaskar, everyone. Just you said that, banning Islam. Now, the impact and repercussions of banning Islam will be huge. India is currently doing very well, thriving again. There'll be civil war. Won't that be taking us backwards?
What are the consequences of not banning? Okay, so look at that. Right now, literally millions of Muslim women are suffering. Okay, so and then you have to turn a blind eye to all of those things. That's number one. And then number two, look at the way societies have regressed. Okay, take Iran, for example, when until 1979, Iranian women actually tasted a lot of freedom. Okay, and then the clergy took over, Khomeini took over, and then they lost all of their freedom. Today, it's one of the most repressive governments in the world. So that's the only way it will progress. Then we can say, look, for the sake of financial progress, and we have no stomach to deal with dissent, and hence we will let this happen. Well, what can we do with it? Okay, if that is the choice Hindus want to make, I have no problem. But second, I'll even challenge the fact that India is doing very well economically. Yes, compared to where we were 10 years ago, compared to where we were 50 years ago, we are doing better. Okay, and by no means India is a prosperous country. About 90% of Indians live on less than $5 a day. Okay, that's an awfully small amount of money for a human being to survive. Okay, you cannot provide healthcare, you cannot provide any decent education, all of those things with that kind of money. Okay, India's infrastructure is very primitive at this stage. Okay, better than what it used to be 10 years ago, much better than what it used to be 50 years ago. However, if this kind of a fledgling and limited economy is more important for us to preserve in the short term than thinking of the long-term consequences, then that's all we deserve. And again, more importantly, think of it this way, right? Today's economy is knowledge-centric, and the future economy is going to be even more knowledge-centric. Okay, and think of millions of Muslim women, okay, who are liberated, and who are no longer oppressed, and then they could go and study neuroscience, they could go and study finance and math, computing and everything, and then they contribute to the future of Indian economy because they are no longer Muslims. They have realized the problem with Islam, and then they are contributing. So they become your vaccine manufacturers, they become your neurosurgeons and everyone. That's a future worth aspiring for. And that future you cannot get to unless you are willing to deal with the teething problem. And I don't even think, while civil war remains a possibility, I don't think it is inevitable. I think it can be something easily contained. All you need to do is, every civil war, every riot is organized by a set of people, ringleaders, and a set of organizations that fund them and orchestrate from behind. Okay, crack down. That's it. That's all I would say. Crack down on them proactively, then you legislate, and then you enforce your legislation with an iron hand. It's doable. That will be benefiting India economically as well. And even more importantly, it will help India to progress along in the positive direction. And more importantly, it will be the right thing to do to Muslims, both men and women.
I think that answers the question, and we should now conclude the meeting for the night.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.
It was a pleasure having you, Venkatji. Your views are really enlightening, and you have put hijab in a truly in its true perspective, and it would help us all understand what dangers this ideology poses for us as a society. Because hijab is not simply a head covering. I used to, in fact, I learned something new, that hijab refers to the full body covering, or the covering not limited to the headscarf. Up till now, I used to believe that hijab was just a headscarf that was religiously, it was a religious injunction. But you gave me a new perspective. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And it was a pleasure having you talk to us and enlightening us with your views. Good night, everyone. And once again, thank you, sir.